Hi everyone, thank you for coming along to today's webinar about WSUD Asset Maintenance. That's going to be presented by myself, Daniel, the WSUD Specialist at Ocean Protect, and Fodos, who is the National Maintenance Manager. Before we get started, I would, if this wants to work, just want to say today is part of the Stormwater Fundamentals series. This year so far, we've completed 10 of these sessions, with today being the 11th one, being about WSUD asset maintenance. And we have one more for the year. If you're interested in seeing the recordings or the slides for these, you're able to view this on our website. And if you want to make sure you don't miss on any upcoming events and webinars, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. What's wrong way? And also something that we can announce is that we have confirmed a schedule and speakers for next year's Stormwater Fundamental series. So covering a whole range of topics, partnering with a few different groups, eWater, Quilty Engineering Hub, and Optimal Stormwater. And if you're interested in subscribing and registering for those, you can do that on our new page on our website, which is the events page. Another thing to announce is that next month we are doing a stormwater symposium in Tasmania, in Hobart, with Derwent Estuary program. There's going to be a bunch of speakers. I'll be heading down, and a few interstate people will be coming along, but also there'll be some experts and specialists down in Hobart coming along to present. Before we get into anything, I do just want to put this declaration of a conflict of interest here. Fodos and I work for Ocean Protect, a company that supplies, installs, and maintains WSUD assets. So there is that conflict of interest around this topic, and so just for transparency, wanted to highlight that. For those of you not familiar with Ocean Protect, we have installed over 70,000 assets in Australia. We estimate that's about capturing 11,000 kilograms of pollution per day. And to date, that would be kind of an estimation of about 24 million kilograms of pollution to date. So all of those numbers are really based on that these assets are being maintained, and that's why we made today's session about WSUD asset maintenance, to really highlight the importance and some common questions in this space. At the end, we will be doing Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel on your screen, and then we can answer them at the end. If you're interested in the slides and recording from today's webinar, they will be made available on our website. And if you're looking to get CPD forms, please send your requests via email to inquiries@oceanprotect.com.au. Now, getting into the actual content. So before we get into things, I just wanted to define what WSUD is and what WSUD assets are before we explain maintenance stuff. But Water by Design defines WSUD as WSUD, which stands for Water Sensitive Urban Design. It is an approach to the planning and design of urban areas that aim to minimize the impacts of urban development on receiving waters while maximizing economically, environmentally, and social benefits outcomes for communities. So it's a way to design and plan urban areas, and part of that is installing WSUD assets to help treat stormwater, to help flooding, to help with water conservation. So there's a range of kind of categories within the kind of umbrella term of WSUD assets. There's stormwater detention assets like OSD, on-site stormwater detention systems, stormwater infiltration assets such as permeable pavement. There's stormwater treatment assets, which are things like gross pollutant traps, bioretention, gully pit inserts, and those sorts of assets looking at treating the water. And then water conservation assets like rainwater tanks. All of these different categories having their kind of purpose, but helping work towards kind of a water sensitive approach to urban design. Now I'll hand it over to Fotos to get into a bit about maintenance.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and thanks to everyone for attending today. The essential item that needs to be addressed here is, why do stormwater treatment assets need to be maintained? I think that comes down to two fundamental reasons. One is obviously the cause that it could have on the environment downstream. It's quite a harmful or toxic solution that could be discharged from these stormwater treatment assets should there be a lack of maintenance, and also the potential breach of development conditions. So to give you guys a bit of an overview, stormwater treatment assets are designed, manufactured, supplied, and installed to demonstrate compliance with local government authorities and their water quality objectives, or the policies that they have in place. What we find in the field and this is probably something that's been happening for over a decade, is the ongoing maintenance is not mandated. And as a result, a lot of this infrastructure is diminished. Non-performing assets um, come in many different shapes and forms. I dare say that there are hundreds of thousands of assets in Australia nationally that currently do not perform as per the original design intent. So very simply put, a treatment asset will achieve its maximum pollutant storage capacity. It then goes into bypass, and the treatment performance is diminished, as I mentioned earlier. The potential risks that are associated with that is flooding, localized flooding, and also some damage to local drainage infrastructure. So to give you an analogy, and it's not a very scientific one, but your bin at home gets emptied, the rubbish bins, on a weekly or fortnightly basis. If that process was to be disturbed, then you would just have a whole bunch of rubbish on the street, and humans or mankind would not be able to sustain livability in that environment. Well, that's exactly what's happening in the downstream waterways. And so there's a lot of work to be done in this space, and Ocean Protect are trying to lead that way. Moving on to the next slide, in terms of who can actually maintain these systems. I think maintenance in general can be broken up into a few different components, one being the routine inspection or the basic visual assessment. There's nothing too cumbersome in that respect. And then you can move into some of the more general annual type frequencies of removal and disposal of litter and debris and sediment. And then you've got more major components, so comprehensive cleaning, whether it be replacement of filters, flow testing, these type of items that are quantified the actual performance of the treatment asset. And finally, some structural repairs or potential rebuilds depending on the extent of the actual device. So I think the take homes here are, depending on the complexity of the actual maintenance work that's required, your contractor selection process should include how reputable are they and how experienced are they in the industry, whether they are able to provide you with a cost-effective solution, the service vehicles or the potential confined space entry requirements that they might have to ensure that they're able to do this work safely and in compliance with all the work health and safety measures, and any specialized plant and equipment, and what that would potentially mean for the asset owner when it comes time to access these devices. We can also look at how these should be maintained. Again, there's a range of different stormwater treatment assets out on the market. So ultimately, you want to ensure that a maintenance contractor is establishing a safe work environment, that there's no intrusion by any pedestrian or traffic, just to make sure that there's no issues moving forward. But in terms of pre-treatment, I'd probably look at assets such as the pit insert. Gully pit baskets, you typically have a graded access cover that can be opened up. You can remove the debris from inside that basket. The actual filter liner itself can be washed down or hosed down, depending on if there's any occlusion in that fine filter fabric. And GPTs, similar kind of thing. If you split it up into ongoing inspection versus comprehensive cleaning, well, then you might be able to just assess the actual sediment accumulation in the bottom of the sump, a visual assessment of any floatables on the surface layer, that kind of oil sheen that sometimes we see due to hydrocarbons can also be noted. And then there's the full vacuum truck type induction, where the entire volume of water and sediment is removed from the chamber. And in some cases, there's also some sort of cleaning behind the screens or actual high pressure washing of the screens to basically bring those back up to a high performing standard. And then in terms of the more tertiary devices, I'd be looking at filtration systems. Some of the key considerations there are, does the actual filter media need replacing? What level of occlusion is there? Does the media need to be replenished? In terms of a membrane technology, you might be looking at rinsing down the actual tentacles or membranes. But ultimately, that level of performance is dictated by the ongoing maintenance program and the suitability to the on-site conditions. Biofiltration is another one. You might be looking at simple processes such as landscaping on contractors adopting the removal of invasive weeds or the replanting of native species. Another monitoring tactic that could be implemented would be to monitor the system for 48 hours after a major rainfall event to see whether it's draining through the filter bed media. And these type of things can determine what level of maintenance needs to be accounted for in the future. Ultimately, the selection of a maintenance contractor and the scope should see that they're responsible for all aspects, and some sort of reporting or compliance certificates are issued that details the scope of what's been completed. So you can build up a history in terms of what's been done, and that can also be issued to the local government authorities, whether they deem that necessary to be compliant. Just also looking at contractually the obligations and what you can engage in. So this next slide is more about the actual maintenance contract itself. I think it's quite simple. A maintenance contract is a legally binding document between two parties, in this case, the asset owner and the maintenance contractor. So some of the key considerations to look at is the duration of the contract. You know, some councils require that there's a minimum 5-year or 10-year period elected to demonstrate compliance with the DA conditions. What are the assets that are covered? How the work will be done? Any exclusions or additional surprise costs that the asset owner might not be aware of is probably one worth noting. And also the ongoing costs, be it annually forecasted for the longevity of that business unit that's operating the assets or that's inherited the system. I think the three key take-home messages from me would be, prior to engaging into a maintenance contract, I think you want your maintenance contractor to come to site and do a once-off thorough inspection of all treatment assets on site. So to basically identify the functionality of the existing system. These could be assets that have just been installed, or there could be assets that have been in operation for 5 or plus years. So that'll kind of determine that initial work schedule, and also the identifying any causes of poor performance. You could see upstream that there's erosion issues or some sort of stockpiling on site that could diminish the system or have an immediate effect during the next rain event. And finally, that schedule, that site-specific schedule to suit the site conditions. I mean, obviously, Ocean Protect has a range of products. There's a range of frequencies that we have typical inspection and maintenance frequencies for those products, but we do really want to have a look at the site-specific constraints and how we can tailor that program to suit and give the most cost-effective outcome for the asset owner. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Fodos. And going off something that Fodos just kind of touched on a little bit is kind of the schedule for the maintenance. And so something that does get conditioned or is required for the management of assets is a document called a maintenance schedule. Blacktown City Council has a kind of a template for theirs, while across the industry it can kind of vary depending on what's included. But basically it is a document that is outlining the requirements for the management of that WSUD system. And for me, some of the things that I think it should be looking to identify to make it easy for the asset owner, make it easy for the council, and for the maintenance contractor are a few things. Firstly, looking at the assets, so basically saying what assets are on this property so that it's clear to everyone exactly what needs to be maintained. Next would be the work activities associated with those assets. So thinking about inspection frequencies, thinking about maintenance, thinking about flow test, thinking about replacements and any other kind of sort of reporting or maintenance work activities that would be needed. And so having that clearly within one document makes it much easier for a system to be managed appropriately. Another one would be those frequencies for those activities. So stating how frequent those should be, whether that's monthly, every 2 months, once a year, every 5 years. It really depends on the site, but also the particular activity being done. I'd also say identifying where those locations for the assets are is really important. It's great to be like, oh, you have 5 ocean guards or 5 or bioretention on your property, but if you don't actually specify where those assets are, it makes it harder for the asset owner to actually know where these assets are, making sure that the maintenance contractor can have appropriate access to do that maintenance, but also for the maintenance contractor, they could come to site and be like, they have no idea where the assets are. And so that confusion can be really helped if this one document has what assets, what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and where those assets are can really help create a kind of a helpful maintenance schedule for everyone involved in the maintenance and enforcement of maintenance for this property. Now, one way that councils can look to ensure maintenance is through a few different things. At Ocean Protect, this is kind of my specialty and my focus. One of the things that council should be looking towards is putting relevant and specific development conditions on properties during that before the development even starts, so that it makes sure that the property is ready to have maintenance happen when those assets are installed. So within the project I've been leading, the WSUD Maintenance Compliance Framework, there's a guideline which actually has in the appendices 4 proposed development conditions that councils can use as of today, or take them to the lawyers and get them workshopped a bit to make it work for their context and situation. But basically, those conditions can help make sure that a maintenance schedule is in place, make sure that a maintenance contract is in place, make sure that a positive covenant, an easement, or whatever is kind of needed to make sure that things will have it, to ensure that council has that ability to enforce it, and any other kind of relevant things to make sure that it will be maintained. The next thing would be WSUD system agreements. So the terminology kind of varies across the country. There could be positive and restrictive covenants. It could be an easement, could be Section 173 agreement, or a range of kind of versions of those. But basically some sort of legally binding agreement that goes on the title of the property, which says that the property owner will maintain the assets in accordance with kind of council's requirements and kind of listen to what council says in this space. And so within that guideline, there is also an appendices all about WSUD system agreements, talking kind of what those are in the different states. And then there is, council should be looking to implement a compliance program. At the moment, Blacktown City Council has their kind of the Australian First compliance program. There are some other councils at the moment talking about looking in the space, whether that's just auditing the private assets, looking at improving kind of internal management of public assets, or looking at kind of their own version of the own compliance program. And that's what the whole framework's about, providing free information to help councils implement and operate their own compliance program. And for those of you interested in it, there's a QR code on this screen and the next screen where you can access it from today and have a look at it. Alternatively, you can go to wsudcompliance.com.au and there's more information there. So for those of you not familiar with the framework, it is a free package of information, resources, and tools that will help councils improve the implementation and management of WSUD assets within their jurisdiction, primarily kind of focused on private assets, but there are elements of this to help public asset management as well. Within this, there's a guideline, there's process maps, there's a mock-up kind of technological system, and a whole range of other things in here as well, content, information, all of it. And that's provided for free via the website, via that QR code. And basically councils can use this and make it modified to suit their needs to kind of really help them get that initial start in implementing a compliance program. And what was I going to say? And so to date, it was released in April this year. Nearly 70 councils in Australia have accessed it. Over 500 people were involved in the 4-month consultation period that closed a few months ago. And there's 7 in-principle supporters for the framework, including organisations such as Stormwater New South Wales, Cooks River Alliance, and Optimal Stormwater, and a range of others as well. But yeah, if anyone's interested in that, more than happy to talk about that outside of this webinar via email or meetings. Now, just some take-home messages before we wrap up for Q&A. Assets need to be maintained. I think that is the main takeaway for everyone from this webinar, is that you need to be maintaining these assets for them to work. Now, for that, you should be looking to get suitably qualified persons to do that maintenance, making sure they have the equipment, making sure they have the experience, making sure they actually can do it. I have seen people previously using garden hoses to try clean out a gross pollutant trap and you'll see a whole range of weird and wacky things happening. So you want to make sure that these people can do the job. Otherwise, it poses a danger to themselves, but also to others on that property. And also, it should be looked to be done in accordance with council's requirements. Council is the regulatory authority for the management of these assets and infrastructure. So making sure that it's being maintained in accordance with what council requires. And some important documents to look at would be the maintenance schedule outlining how to do the maintenance. Then there's the maintenance contract that outlines that, yep, things will be done in accordance with that maintenance schedule. And then councils really do need to look to improve management of WSUD assets. It does seem to be something that people are working towards now. However, it is something that the industry has been struggling with for a long time. And so look, that is the end of this. So we're going to go into Q&A now before I hand it over to Brad to facilitate that. If you do have any questions, if you can chuck that in the Q&A panel, just makes it easy for us to kind of manage that. If you're looking to get the slides and recording of today's webinar, that will be available on the Ocean Protect website. And if you're looking to get CPD forms, go to send an email to inquiries@oceanprotect.com.au. And so we do have one more session for this year for the 2024 series of the Stormwater Fundamentals, which will be about WSUD asset compliance, which I'll be talking a bit about the work that I'm doing. And again, for those that missed it at the start, we do have another series lined up for next year with a range of organizations and great speakers to talk about a range of important topics. If you're interested in registering for those, go to our new page, the events page on our website. And that's it. So I'll hand it over to Brad.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Photos. Wonderful presentation. I've just had a solitary question come through. Everyone's being very, very polite and well behaved, which I don't like. I don't aspire to be like that anyway. Photos can attest for. So the question is from Sumya Senadira. Apologies if I mispronounced that wrong. Sumya asks, is there any different mechanism to maintain devices that collect firewater? I'm not talking about fireball liquor Photos, just to clarify, or moonshine or whiskey. I'm talking about firefighting water.
Yeah, I think in the what comes to mind is probably the PFAS technology, right? That'd be a potential solution to treating the discharge from firefighting kind of equipment that has that kind of chemicals associated with it. I just feel like we may not necessarily be at that stage yet in terms of the technological advancements or the solutions that are in the market. But I'm sure that these types of systems do exist. It'd probably be more of a oil water separator type of technology that be implemented to treat that or temporarily store that so that it can be collected and disposed of appropriately. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Photos was saying there for that question. Yeah, no, I'll leave it at that.
Cool. No worries. A question from, and there's a couple of questions in the chat, but just a reminder, folks, if you can put them in the Q&A, that'd be great. A question from Alan Zong. Alan asks, if I'm maintaining, let's say, pits with inserts, would you consider that as a confined space entry? Just opening up the pit to clean out the basket at ground level and not going into the pit? A question for Photos.
Yeah, I think that the technical definition from the Work Health Safety Australia, Work Safe Australia would be that any pit greater than 2 meters in depth is classified as a confined space. Now, if a pit insert is installed inside a stormwater pit that's greater than 2 meters depth, then I would technically say that is referred to as a confined space, and then the appropriate plant or equipment should be set up in order to service that appropriately. But I think it also falls into your local jurisdiction, exactly where the pit's located on site and what kind of access issues you're presented with in order to get those periodic servicing works completed.
So just to clarify, if you don't enter the pit, if you're literally standing on the ground level and say sucking it out with a sucker truck, for example, do you still need a confined space entry ticket for that situation? And it equally could apply to, say, a wet sump GPT. If you're standing near a wet sump GPT, not entering the pit, visual inspection or a vacuum suck, for example, that you're not entering the pit, do you still need a confined space entry?
Not necessarily, no. But I think the confined space entry work that we do, and in my experience, would be more, it's associated also with a working at heights permit. So just the fact that you're standing around an access point that's greater than 2 meters, you would need to have suitably qualified personnel conduct those works. It's not necessarily falls into a confined space arrangement.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, yeah, like you're not really entering that confined space, but there is that chance that you could fall from a height technically or go into a confined space if you were to fall into that pit once you've removed that. So there is that kind of chance.
Sure. Hopefully that answers your question, Alan, but any further clarification? I'll probably just reach out to one of the two gentlemen here. A question from Steve Edwards. Steve asks, have the historic problems with maintenance been mainly due to lack of attention, a set and forget mentality amongst councils, or were they budget related? Probably a guess, but what do you guys think?
Oh,
I think,
yeah, sorry, Daniel, you first.
No, I was going to say it's probably a bit of both. Like some people just put it in thinking, oh yeah, this is just going to treat the water forever or conserve the water or help with flood mitigation forever. So I think there's that element to it. But then also, yeah, budget is not enough is put towards the maintenance of these assets because I guess with councils, they have to listen to what the public's saying. And so you're going to have the public making complaints and stuff more about roads and parks and that sort of infrastructure, while most WSUD assets are kind of underground, hidden, and not as easily understood or seen. So I think appropriate budget isn't put towards it, so then they can't be appropriately maintained.
Yeah.
Cool. You might remember Stormwater New South Wales President Andrew Thomas did a PhD on why stormwater treatment assets aren't being maintained. So if you're keen for some reading material and nothing but beats a PhD, maybe reach out to Andrew, Steve, for further info.
I'll just add to that real quickly. But in terms of, like we've identified, obviously, that local governments are the key drivers in terms of getting these assets maintained long term. We've seen the success maybe across 2 or 3 different councils in Australia. And so without a doubt, you're not going to have the implementation of stormwater treatment assets being maintained long term without that key policy mandating within the development conditions. That's definitely the key driver here.
Cool. I might move on to the next question. A question from Aaron Edwards from Arup. Aaron asks, are there any tools or guides available for estimating life cycle maintenance costs? Daniel, maybe?
Yeah, I can talk to it a little bit. So there is the life cycle cost tool at the moment that water sensitive cities, Australia and E2 Design Lab are working on. It doesn't cover every single asset, but that is something that they are starting in this point, kind of in this area, because yeah, a lot of people want to be talking about this and looking at this, but a lot of work hasn't been done in it. You can come along to manufacturers and kind of certain, I guess, experts and ask them roughly kind of what they would think. But at the moment, I don't think there's really a lot of tools or guides out there, but maybe I'm wrong and Brad knows something.
Oh, there's some dodgy guidance. If I can cast my memory back, eWater has a life cycle costing module in their music software that's based on very little data, unfortunately, and that's probably 20 years old now. Obviously, that Daniel mentioned, you can approach the manufacturers or maintenance contractors who can provide indication of prices. Another reference is the WSUD life cycle costs from Melbourne Water. That's a 2012 or 2014 document, I think. That's old. High level general unit rates for different asset types. But I think for me, the key thing that is always forgotten is that and I hate to say this, but it depends. A bioretention system, for example, that's small on the outskirts of Toowoomba is going to be very different in terms of costs relative to the same system where if it's right in the Brisbane CBD. In terms of as Photos can attest to, one of the biggest dramas is just access, travel time, etc. So fundamentally, I think the maintenance, if there is guides available, they should be used with caution. But I think overwhelmingly, I think maintenance costs for, unless you're getting it from a maintenance contractor, are generally inaccurate, unfortunately. Photos, anything further to add on that one?
I'd just say that as the technologies evolve in the industry, I think there's probably a lot more allowance for ongoing maintenance costs incorporated in that upfront design, that kind of research and development component. And so I'm pretty excited in this space to see where it can go, because ongoing maintenance may not necessarily have had the recognition or the upfront compatibility into the entire WSUD process, whereas now there's a lot more attention or focus on that. So I'm pretty excited to see how we as a manufacturer can drive those ongoing maintenance costs down, which is ultimately going to impact the asset owners and make it more appetizing for people to take on these ongoing maintenance monitoring programs.
Cool. Thank you, gentlemen. A question from Angela Dunnett from the Parramatta River Catchment Group. And Angela almost asked the opposite question, kind of. How much does it cost to not maintain WSUD assets?
Yeah.
That's a bit of a curly question. So who would like to give that a crack?
Photos, do you want to say anything, or I can give it a crack?
Please, Daniel.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I think at the moment, there probably isn't enough research into this space. It is something that I'm kind of keen to learn more about and something I can maybe investigate in the following years. But I think when thinking about this, most people think, oh yeah, we don't have the budget to maintain it, so then they just focus on that. But it's a really good question from Angela, because yeah, there are financial costs and economic costs and social and environmental costs and impacts from these assets not being maintained, because yeah, the pollution, if it's a private asset, bypasses that, goes into a public asset. Otherwise, there's also like cleanup costs. There's the impacts on water quality, ecosystems, wildlife, human health, the dangers of flooding and infrastructure damage and urban heat island effect, and a whole range of things that I don't think I haven't really come across it much, but I do think, yeah, it's something that needs to be looked into more.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, there's certainly a previous study by Water by Design back in the day, business case for just water sensitive design. And if you don't maintain your assets, the WSUD is kind of better off just not even being there, or base acts more or less the same. So I think the cost of non-action is probably similar to not maintaining assets, but then you've got the added cost of trying to fix something up, which can be very expensive. Easy to maintain like a car, then try and build a new one. We'll move on. Another question from Steve Edwards from Pit and Cherry. Steve asks, is it fair to say that the need for the new compliance framework is because water sensitive design is part of an integrated holistic treatment system rather than a view of each item as a standalone piece?
So yes, that's for me. But so yeah, I think the idea for this framework was one to kind of get people to think about these as the same things, because I always hear people being like, oh, WSUD, OSD, GPTs, all kind of as different things. But by bringing them all in together, it's helped kind of standardize and increase the chance of actually seeing this infrastructure being maintained properly. The idea of the framework was to provide a good starting point to help save time, capacity, resourcing, finances, and everything for councils. So that's one of, I guess, a main need for it. But yeah, looking at it as a system and as a network rather than individual assets is probably part of this.
Cool. Might move on to a question from Jiva Sivarantham. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. And it's a bit of a killer question as well. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it, but he asks, do you use other separators like Puriceptor, triple septors used to separate fog, which is fats, oil, and grease, and etc., in combination with the WSUD package? So basically, would you use, I guess, our devices maybe or others as part of a treatment train if it's treating fats and oils and greases, I think.
I think, yeah, it just really depends on the particular property. And I guess, yeah, fats, oils, and grease. You could be looking at kind of pre-treatment, like stormwater treatment assets to help kind of remove some of that. And then you have a few other assets after it. You could have a gully pit insert to capture those gross pollutants. And then it goes down to a filter cartridge, a filter membrane technology to look at more removing those sorts of pollutants.
Cool. I'll move on to another question from Loic Thoman, and I believe Loic is from Stantec. He says, I find it funny how the presentation is just WSUD devices need to be maintained, but easier said than done, I guess, and dollars have to come from somewhere.
And nope, I agree. It is easier said than done, and I recognize that. I've had my experience in Blacktown Council looking at helping them improve maintenance of private assets, and had some conversations about public assets. And that is kind of the point of this framework, to really help provide that stepping point, kind of that stepping stone into getting this to happen, because I recognize Ocean Protect and others have recognized the costs, the capacity issues, the resourcing issues. So this framework is to kind of help that. But yeah, I recognize that in this presentation, it is easier said than done to just be like, yep, WSUD assets need to be maintained. But the reality is they do need to be maintained. We just need to come up with that solution to solve that issue. And that's kind of where this framework is hoping to help the industry.
Yeah, a comment from, thank you, Daniel. A comment from Paul Angelkowski from Whittlesea Council. And he's just sort of commented here, which it's quite interesting. And so he said the city of Whittlesea is actually going through a revitalisation of one of our lakes, the Peter Hopper Lake. It was delivered in the mid-1970s and can potentially answer Angela's question around what happens when you don't maintain it. I don't have the knowledge of exactly what works are occurring or how much it is costing, but it could be a good case study. And he's sent through a link I'll include in the chat. But I think that's the lake that I think I've heard Murray Powell from Up North Stormwater talk about fixing up, because it just didn't have any pre-treatment at all, and probably didn't get maintained at all. And it's an enormously expensive and just resource intensive exercise. You're literally draining a lake and digging it up again, and basically, obviously impacting the ecology in that lake massively. So long story short, if you don't maintain anything, it'll cost a lot to fix it up later on, just like a car. Jun Bong asks, maybe out of today's topic, is WSUD best practice compliance required if stormwater is proposed to be discharging to a surrounding groundwater or / infiltration via a soakage system? So long story short, do you think you need, I guess, stormwater treatment if it's just draining to a underground aquifer or groundwater? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd definitely say yes. But it's also subject to local jurisdiction or local government authorities' policies that are in place. Depending on the soil conditions, the infiltration rates, what might be lying beneath in terms of the aquifers or discharge to groundwater, you may not necessarily want to discharge toxic effluent into those areas, which would therefore pollute the further downstream, the local waterways, right?
Yeah, it's pretty clear. Water by design make it very clear. Groundwater is a receiving water environment. Need to treat it before it discharges in. Question from Matthew Funnel, and Matthew's from a Scenic Rim Regional Council. So greetings, Matthew, the wonders of modern technology bring us all together from Adelaide to Parramatta to Hobart to the Scenic Rim. Matthew asks, are the standard maintenance periods of 12 months reasonable for all WSUD assets?
I would say no. I think it's really dependent on the site. There's a whole range of characteristics that would be affecting how frequently these assets need to be maintained. I recognize for councils with limited budgets and capacity and stuff, maybe once a year is all that is possible. However, for these assets to work as intended, it would require probably a more frequent period than 12 months, in my opinion.
Fados, any other further comments on that one?
Oh, yeah, I think the asset owner could be demonstrating environmental harm to downstream waterways, and that's dependent on a range of factors. Site-specific conditions, I think you want to look at the annual rainfall for that catchment, the catchment area, site application, commercial, industrial, residential, traffic patterns. All these things will contribute to pollutant load generating factors, and based on those site-specific requirements, you can tailor a maintenance program to suit. And so that's the frequencies, the cleaning frequencies would be subject to that site. So in my experience, it's probably a 4-monthly or 6-monthly cycle where you want to have some sort of visual assessment, and then those first couple of years of establishment is really where you're going to be able to determine whether that annual cleaning cycle is suitable.
So in short, no is the answer to that question. It depends. I recall one council, I won't mention their name because I think they're listening in, but it's GPT that's just undersized. Was one of ours, full disclosure, but just a fully undersized GPT, and council need to clean it out after every rainfall event. And it's a mass. It is a large GPT, but it's a massive catchment. Anyway, so long story short, depends. Maintenance frequencies. And another question from Angela Moore, who I believe is from Clarence City Council. So greetings, Angela. Hopefully see the Tasmania Stormwater Symposium next month. How exciting. Angela asks, when a GPT or other capture system goes without maintenance for an extended period, is the effect more similar to if the GPT wasn't there / in bypass? Or does the concentrated material actually make things worse than if the system wasn't there at all? That's a great question. Spiteco, I'll let you guys answer it first, but I can add my 2 cents as well if you like.
Before things get too technical, I might just say, I think it really depends on what you define as worse, because if it's captured in that spot, then it's going to have some sort of impacts on that area, and then maybe it's reducing some of the pollution going further downstream. So technically it could be better off downstream, but at source it would be worse. But then if you had no treatment at all, yeah, it's better at that site because there's no pollution there, but then it's worse downstream because that pollution would just be going past. But I'll leave it to the engineers to be more technical.
Look, the other thing I'd say would be the fact that heavy metals attach themselves to sediment. So in terms of the sump zone of the GPT, you might have a large number of toxic metals that accumulate within that environment. It's a wet sump arrangement, and so the actual properties of that water may change the anaerobic, and as a result cause some sort of toxicity, right? So there is the potential for things to become more harmful than if the treatment asset was installed initially.
Yeah, no, I agree. Basically, yeah, particularly I think Angela might be referring to wet sump GPT. So full disclosure, we've got a massive conflict of interest here. We sell wet sump gross pollutant traps like the Ocean Save, for example. When we modeled the Ocean Save as an example, we assume 0 nitrogen removal. So you might be able to often capture some, particulate bound nitrogen or other nutrients, for example, but unless you're maintaining it after every event, that material, and let's face it, most gross pollutants in stormwater is organic. And if that material is left there for an extended period of time, which it invariably is, because most GPTs don't get cleaned out more than every year or so, you will get basically what we call biotransformation. So particulate bound or organic nutrients will be mineralized and become dissolved, and that can actually be more damaging into the downstream environment because invariably you get a subsequent rainfall event which will flush some of that pollution downstream, and potentially make it worse than if the GPT wasn't there at all. So hence, number one, the importance of appropriately selecting and designing and maintaining your GPT. But fundamentally, yeah, it can be worse if those things don't happen. Hence the importance of maintenance. Hence why we do a webinar like this highlighting the importance. That makes sense? If you keep more information about that, Angela, I'm happy to talk further. So Glenn Leishman. Glenn asks, any thoughts on maintenance of floating GPT assets? Do you think that remote monitoring is vital for triggering maintenance events given the higher on-water costs? Daniel or Photos?
Yeah, I'll give it a bit of a go. Yeah, I think remote monitoring, even for on-land assets or like underground assets, is also an important thing. I think remote sensors and all of that would be a real help for the industry in saving a lot of the capacity resourcing issues that councils and other asset owners face. And that is something, a technology that Ocean Protect is looking into at the moment, is sensors to help with GPTs, kind of monitoring them to help with that. So then you know when it needs to be maintained rather than going out every few months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever the frequency ends up being. So whether it's floating or not floating GPT, I think it is a important thing. But I do think for floating assets, it would help since it does have higher on-water costs.
Yeah, and also there's a emphasis on product validation. So there's a whole bunch of protocols where, should the actual device perform, and can you demonstrate that through some sort of field testing or monitoring, and basically assessing that through different rain events to be able to show that there's a certain amount of pollutant reduction targets being achieved. And then more often than not, that's also being done in a treatment train application to demonstrate that. But that's where the emphasis is. It's not necessarily lies in the back end for the ongoing monitoring component, which I think there definitely should be more studies to show how assets perform long term, because it's clear that a lot of these systems are failing, and that's what we see in the field every day.
Cool. If I can add my 2 cents, and I'm always got an opinion about something. Any thoughts on maintenance of floating GPT assets? Yeah, look, they do something, but it's far easier to stop pollution from entering the waterway before you actually try and capture it after it's already in the waterway. So we can use passively just flowing stormwater to intercept that pollution before it gets downstream into the waterway. Once it's in the waterway, it's far more difficult to remove. And if it's a floating GPT asset, like you see in, say, the Yarra River in Melbourne, that's only capturing the floating plastic. And that's only a very small proportion of the overall plastic load on that waterway. Most plastic sinks, okay? In terms of sensors, that's the way this industry is going. Yeah, there is certainly value in putting sensors in a bunch of treatment technologies, including these floating GPT assets. There's a question in the chat from Glenn. Do you have any recommendations around sensor technologies? We're biased because we're actually in the process of developing one. So hopefully they'll be ready for market very soon, Glenn. So I'll let you know when it's available. But in the meantime, feel free to drop us a line and maybe do a trial. We're actually looking to trial them now. We've already done a bunch of trials, and we're going to do some others. Cool. Next question from Andre Mega. He says, "Thank you, gents. Dan, awesome work on the compliance framework. What has been your biggest challenge getting this framework live and running?" He says, "I'm wearing my Stormwater New South Wales hat on here. We strongly support such a framework, as you mentioned, but what can the industry do to help implement such a framework?" What do you think?
Probably the biggest challenge is the fact that councils have limited budgets, resources, and capacity to do something like this. The idea is that framework is modifiable and providing a lot of resources, information, and help. So I think that is probably going to be the biggest obstacle in implementing this sort of framework. So I think, yeah, that's kind of the thing. And so for the industry to help with that, I think it's everyone kind of stepping up and helping, whether that's becoming a project partner or providing some sort of support with the framework to help that provide even more help and more resources, more information, or working with councils and trying to help them improve upon their limited resources or help advocate and push for more money to go towards councils' budgeting, but also options to raise that money to do that sort of work. So I think it's really resourcing to implement it is that biggest issue, and the industry can kind of advocate or help councils where they can in helping them with resources.
Cool. Thanks, Andre. A question from Yelena Shrep from Stantec. And there might be one for Photos, actually. Yelena asks, "Have you ever encountered a situation where an Ocean Protect asset was installed but no maintenance agreement was signed for that development? Is it correct to assume that the asset has never been maintained / will never been maintained then? What would be your course of action in this case as the manufacturer of this asset? Is there a way to enforce that?" That's a great question. Something we probably battle with ourselves internally, what to do. But Photos, what do you think?
Oh, I think one of the earlier slides that Daniel presented was that we had something like 70,000 assets installed nationally across Australia. I dare say that if I had to put a figure around how many of those assets are being maintained, it would fall somewhere between the 10 to 20% of those assets being maintained, unfortunately. So I think we as a manufacturer definitely have an ethical responsibility to approach those asset owners and try to get some traction in terms of um, at least educating them on what it is that they have on site, keeping in mind that in a lot of cases they may not necessarily be aware that they have treatment assets on their site. So there's an educational step, and then the success of having those systems put into an ongoing maintenance and monitoring program might be slim based on the potential costs involved or the that kind of bill shock. There's a potential for the asset owner to not have the funds available. So it's kind of a long-term process that gets put into place there. But definitely the success would be subject to what type of treatment asset is it? Whereabouts is it installed? Is the asset owner aware that that unit's in place? Historically, I think councils probably struggle with the lack of information that they have in place, even for their own assets. But moving forward, I think things are kind of turning around and we're kind of seeing a bit more acceptance or positivity around getting these assets maintained appropriately.
Yeah, and I think building off that, I would say that, yeah, the framework is kind of helping. Well, purpose of that is to help get those processes in place so councils can capture that data earlier on during the development process, so it's easier to enforce maintenance and compliance during that operational stage. But what I would also kind of say is an Ocean Protect assets are installed. Not all of them are maintained by Ocean Protect. There are other maintenance providers in the market. So Ocean Protect doesn't have to be the maintenance provider for all Ocean Protect assets. So it would be wrong to assume that just because we're not maintaining it, it's not being maintained. But yeah, it would require a bit of work with councils to enforce it because we don't have any legal grounds unless they've signed a maintenance agreement or contract with us.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that in some areas, the proportion of assets that we're maintaining that we've installed is actually really quite high. Like, and particularly, you showed me the figures the other day, Daniel. I can't remember what it was, but based in councils where they require a maintenance contract to be signed as part of the development approval, like Gold Coast,
It was about
yes,
40%, about 40% maintained by us.
So if for all the council people on this call, if you take anything away from this session, is obviously maintenance is important, but you can actually help that really easily by requiring a maintenance contract to be signed as part of the DA approval. And if you're wondering what to say, you can actually copy and paste the words from the WSUD framework. So the work's been done for you. But it's an interesting space. Like Daniel's pointed out previously that it is illegal to not maintain these assets, but we're in a sticky situation. What do? Do we dob on our clients? That's not something we'd certainly be comfortable with, and I don't think anyone would be. But it's a really tricky situation for us to be in as suppliers of these assets, knowing that we're not maintaining the assets, so there's a potential that it might not be maintained at all. It's a difficult scenario for us to be in, and I'm not sure if there's an easy solution. But hence why we're trying to actually promote this as an issue and actually get more traction on this issue, particularly from regulators.
And I think also if council does have a dedicated compliance officer that goes out and inspects stormwater infrastructure and identifies non-compliance, I don't necessarily think that it's their job to and enforce that via some sort of fine. I think it's more of a working with the asset owner, because the ultimate outcome that we want here is for those assets to be maintained. So it's trying to get them on board rather than issue some sort of compliance notice and come after them, so to speak, in a bad sense.
Cool. Thanks, gentlemen. Question or maybe a comment from Aaron Edwards, I think, and Jess, but I could actually respond to it if you want, because it's about politicians.
Yep.
Aaron asks, can we get a politician to cut a ribbon for the maintenance of a WSUD asset? May be a way of getting better funding. I include a link to this, what I'm about to say, in the chat, Aaron, but you might have seen the Queensland Liberal Party have actually committed to $35 million in funding around a zero litter to bay campaign. Now, it looks like the Liberals are probably going to get in Queensland, so it looks like that actually campaign's going to happen. But that $35 million, there's been some criticism I've seen on social media saying, oh, Ocean Protect are just looking to sell more GPTs. Yeah, nice comment, but you're wrong, whoever's saying that. But most of the budget for the zero litter to bay is actually associated with improved maintenance of assets. So the zero litter to a campaign or initiative or policy is more focused around maintenance of WSUD assets than it is about new assets. So fundamentally, yeah, there's a way of getting a politician to do something about improving maintenance, and it required political lobbying, and that's what we've done, and that's what seems like it might be successful. So if you're keen to know more about that zero litter to bay initiative by the LNP in Queensland, just do a quick Google or just drop us a line. So that's a really, for me, a great way to get change. It's basically highlighting the fact that if we don't maintain these assets, our waterways are impacted. And the key metric from my perspective is litter. It's very hard to sell action on nutrients and dissolved metals because no one understands it. Litter, everyone gets. And hence, we've been really successful in this regard. So we're only just starting. That's just one state. That money, by the way, will be given to local councils. So it's going to be spread across 3 councils: Brisbane, Moreton Bay, and Redland Council. They will literally just be given money for the state government to do what they wish to in terms of improving, reducing litter discharges at Moreton Bay. I think that's a win.
I think we need to see, just in addition to your comments, Brad, we need to see more pollution studies or government organizations implementing that kind of research, generating their own data, because you're right. And what the gentleman mentioned earlier about Ocean Protect kind of harping on about how important this is. Well, typically we're seen in the eyes as a manufacturer or supplier of goods, whereas if this data is being generated, scientific evidence is being done internally by government organizations, I think they have a much stronger reason to act on this and implement the appropriate policies that would suit the benefits of having these systems maintained as opposed to not.
Yeah, cool. There's another question from Matthew Kirby. He asks, the litter to bay funding only notes Moreton Bay as a benefiting region. Is that correct? It's the Moreton Bay region, which includes waterways in Brisbane, Moreton Bay Council, and Redland Council. So if you can know more, just give us a shout. There's a question from Mohammed Reza Tashayoy from a PhD candidate from Swinburne University. Says, is there a framework to improve the design of assets based on maintenance reports? And this is an interesting question. So is there a way of learning what we see in the field? Might be a question for Photos or Daniel. Is there a way of learning what we're seeing in the field and actually updating our design advice or manuals?
I would say there should be. I don't really think a lot of people are, I don't think it's happening enough where people are going out and having a look at what's happening and see how they can improve upon their work. A lot of the industry people, I guess, doing the designs, doing kind of the more office-based stuff, don't really get to see their designs in real life, and it's very different from what you see on a plan and what you see in the real world. So I think just going out can kind of help. So not necessarily a framework, but just an experience. Go out and look at some of your assets you've designed, and that can kind of help with the framework, the WSUD Maintenance Compliance Framework. Long term, I would love to see that become a WSUD compliance framework, which is looking at design compliance, construction compliance, and everything. However, it's just kind of that start of this is kind of how you do maintenance compliance. Because yeah, I think we should be looking towards the performance and long-term monitoring of assets and the lessons we've learned from people doing the actual maintenance, getting them involved in the conversation and telling us what their experiences are and what their lessons and learnings are for the industry to learn from.
Any comments, Photos?
I think definitely there are fundamental benefits in taking all the years of experience from a maintenance contractor and feeding that back into the design process so that designers of stormwater treatment assets can effectively size up their systems or implement better strategies. What that has an effect on is the actual treatment performance or the longevity of certain devices, which would in turn reduce ongoing costs, right? You're
Mm.
basically maximizing the system. So I'm all for that idea.
Mm. I would also just add to that, like a company like Ocean Protect, we supply them, we design them, we install, we maintain them. So if there are interest in learning more about how you could design things better, Ocean Protect does offer lunch and learn. So if there's designers out there that want to learn more about kind of that maintenance experience and that real world experience, we're probably more than happy to have a meeting and chat through what we think could help you with designs.
Yeah. My only comment also is it's slow. At Ocean Protect, yeah, we update our manuals quite frequently based on what we see in the field. And yeah, it's a tedious task, but it actually is a lot of benefit particularly because we save money and know our assets work better when we're learning stuff from the field and integrating into future designs. But if I'm honest, I don't see that happening really that frequently for non-proprietary assets. So give an example. If I look at the WSUD technical design guidelines we have in Southeast Queensland, they haven't been updated since 2006. So there's a new bioretention guideline that was done in 2018 and an update to the filter media specifications a year or two ago. But people are designing wetland swales, head basins consistent with a guideline that's 18 years old. Can you believe that? And there's a lot of stuff that we've learned, particularly around wetlands. Number one, you really should have GPTs upstream of wetlands to reduce sort of maintenance burdens and improve function. So I really feel as though there needs to be some sort of more live web-based guidance or framework on how to best design a whole range of assets, not just potentially proprietary assets. Now, the last question is a long one, and it's from Sana, and I'll get where, sorry, it's Sana's from
Mitchell Shire Council.
Mitchell Shire Council, and apologies, it's a long question. She's doing some wonderful thank yous and whatever, but her key question is, I guess, two part. And it's relevant to a whole bunch of councils probably listening in. So Sana says, given that resource availability varies significantly between councils, particularly with the growing demands from population growth and new developments, has there been any consideration or discussion on leveraging state government involvement to better allocate resources? For instance, could a statewide data-driven approach be employed where factors like population growth, development activity, and environmental needs are assessed at a higher level to determine the required resources for each council? Additionally, do you think it would be feasible to initiate communication between councils and the state government to develop a more cohesive resource planning and allocation strategy, particularly for WSUD projects? Daniel, do you want to have a go?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to kind of cover with this. I do think one thing I would like to highlight is that recently, as part of the consultation period for the WSUD Maintenance Compliance Framework, there was state government involvement in kind of the discussions and in workshops I held. And it does seem that state government in Queensland and New South Wales are kind of getting more aware and looking to try and do more work in this space. So I think through getting stormwater associations on the state level can kind of advocate and push would be helpful. I think with Stormwater New South Wales, they are kind of looking towards the stormwater management service charge in New South Wales, which provides some revenue for councils, which hasn't increased for a long time. So working with state government to try and get that money to increase would allow for better maintenance and better resourcing. I think a statewide data-driven approach would be great. I think the issue with that would be having the resources in place to be able to collect all that data and actually analyze it and use it. But I think getting as much data as possible is helpful. I think, yeah, I'm not sure if I've covered everything, but that's my response.
Might be worth a follow-up chat because it's a long question and probably needs a more, yeah, look, Daniel's done a great job answering it, but it's obviously a big issue beyond probably the scope of an hour-long webinar. And on that, we are flush out of time. Thank you so much, Daniel. If you want to just get that slide up that shows how to get the CPD forms, that'd be great. But yeah, just a very big thank you for everyone who's dialed into that. Another super popular webinar. I think it was about 400 or so regos. I can't remember what it was. Daniel, give me exact numbers.
Over 500.
There you go. Super popular. We certainly appreciate everyone's attendance. So, and if you are keen to get a copy of the webinar slides, like I said, and as per this, it'll be on the website soon. But if you have any CPD requests, please email inquiries@oceanprotect.com.au. But thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Photos, for your wonderful presentation. And look forward to seeing everyone at the next event.
Thank you for your time.
Which
Yes,
is, Daniel?
Which will be me talking about WSUD asset compliance
There you go.
in November.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thanks,
Brad.
guys.